The National Student Financial Aid Scheme has so far received 50,000 more applications this year than last year. Of the more than 200,000 applications received since the opening of the 2020 cycle last month, only 10% of those chose TVET colleges as their preferred institution of study. To tell us more about this, Dr. Randall Carolissen of NSFAS. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
So why do you think that is? Why do you think that you've got such a small margin of applicants applying for NSFAS?
It is concerning that TVET education is still viewed as the second choice. So most of these students, they all apply for university, and if they then are not successful, then they only apply to TVET. That was our experience in the past. We were hoping that this year there would be a shift, but obviously it hasn't changed. Now, what will happen in the new year, early in the new year, we will have a deluge of students in the TVETs that must be processed quite rapidly. Last year we had more than 100,000 students that then went to TVET college because they couldn't get into universities. Universities have got certain enrollment plans and certain enrollment ceilings, and so, you know, that's quite a competition to get in.
Do you think it's because the other reason being that you as NSFAS, or we as a country, have not done enough to promote TVET colleges and the requisite skills that they possibly offer? What pupils who, besides just being rejected by universities, can actually get out of TVET colleges?
Well, TVET colleges should be in many ways the preferred choice. If you look at the rest of Africa, the emphasis that they place on TVET colleges, I was just at a conference here about 2 weeks ago, and the attendant benefits you get from generating large amount of skills and the correct type of skills, it's for all to see. And you can make a lucrative career out of that. I think in South Africa the paradigm has not shifted yet, and I think a lot of work needs to go into.
But why is it? Why is it because there's still this view of artisanal skills in a manner that is less than promoting of a brighter future?
I think probably we have some legacy issues from the past that TVETs were substandard, but I think the amount of investment that governments these days making into some of these TVET colleges are quite phenomenal. And if one sees these colleges, you can actually relate to it as being a place of excellence. And so I think a lot of work needs to be done in schools and guidance, you know, through guidance lessons and so on, because I think we don't do enough to promote skills as the developmental vehicle for South Africa.
So let's talk about the applications that you've received thus far. Which province had the highest number?
It's quite interesting. It's quite a widespread. We have this morning 230,000 applications. 1/3, just under 70%, came from KZN, about 50% from Gauteng, and from Limpopo about 40,000. The other provinces are languishing behind. We had an engagement with the Free State Premier, and she did wonderful work, and we can actually see the numbers climbing. So the Northern Cape, Western Cape, and Northwest to some extent are languishing quite badly behind, and we are engaging.
What are the reasons for that? Because I'm just thinking, just in terms of poverty levels in some of these provinces, you would expect that there would be more applications coming out, some of them.
I think the provinces that do as well as I described are investing in the school system, because we want young people to apply even before they leave school. And so where we see these successes, we actually see the translation of that effort. But we are going to have chats with the other provinces to assist. Like I said, the Free State have been magnificent. They are really pushing hard to up their numbers. And the earlier we get the numbers, of course, the earlier we can process, and the earlier we can get people to know their status with NSFAS. And at the same time, they can also then apply for universities. And it makes it so much easier to apply earlier.
So, Randall, is it mostly from grade 12 learners, the applications?
So grade 12 learner, for university entrance, you know, of course, need to have a bachelor pass. But for TVET colleges, you can apply from 9,
I mean,
10,
from
11.
the applications that you've received?
Well, at the moment, mostly from, yeah, of course. And there's some other interesting stats also, mostly from grade 12. Half of our applicants come from out-of-school youths. So, in other words, the schools will still come to the party. 2/3 of it come from females. And so you see very interesting statistics once you begin to unpack it down to district level even. We expect the bulk of the applications, or the remainder, to come in the last month, as usual. Last year we had 450,000 applications when we closed.
And what about postgraduate studies? Are you seeing a significant number of applicants from there? And I'm thinking of the projects that we saw in KwaZulu-Natal, and a lot of that was centered around that there's not enough funding for people who want to do postgraduate studies.
Well, at the moment, NSFAS by and large don't fund postgraduate studies. The intent of NSFAS is to allow people to get a first qualification and then enter the job market. But there is a debate to be had, because our country needs high-level skills as well. And like students always say, it doesn't mean they are less poor once they have a degree. So that's a debate that must still be brought to conclusion about where the money should come
because
from.
At some point you did talk about that as NSFAS, to say that that is something that you're going to look into, and I'm wondering if that discussion has already started, if there's been any, because there is a task team looking at some of these
That's right,
issues.
yes. So we are waiting the outcome of the task team. We are waiting the rules and guidelines for 2020. But postgraduate study and furtherance of skills beyond just graduate is hugely important for our country.
Okay. The issue of the missing middle, that was something that was also a major issue. Do you think you are closing in on that gap? How are you grappling with this
Not
issue?
at the moment. There's still a lot of work that must be required because we run the risk of having a bipolar society at university or at institutional level. Only the very poor and the very rich and the missing middle. And they have real problems. I mean, I've been at WITS, and we see the suffering of the missing middle. And so we have to find a way to get the missing middle's access improved. I've got some ideas, and in many African countries, they actually have a loan system that bridges this gap. And one should, and I think we should as government look at that too.
But that also has presented some problems, that loan system, where some say it, in the end, burdens a lot of these students with loans that they can't afford, interest rates that are too high, especially if it takes long for them to find jobs. As we've seen, the job market in South Africa isn't exactly absorbing them.
While the previous loan system was very generous, the interest rates were low, and you only started paying once you reach a certain threshold. I think it was 30,000 Rand earning. But what's interesting in African countries, all their systems are loan systems, and their recovery rate is quite good. And when I inquired as to why it is so good, it says when you provide an education to somebody and he does not have to pay black tax, in other words, his sister or sibling can then also enter the system in the same way, then that frees up some capital. And some of these countries have remarkable recovery rates. I think as a country there, we need to be creative and we need to find ways to get the missing middle into the education sphere.
I mean, that is also borne out by the challenges we've seen in the higher education system when it comes to accommodation, which has been a major problem for you.
Yes.
When it comes to safety, because students are then forced to live off campus in unsafe environments. So, I mean, as much as you can alleviate that problem, there's the bigger societal problem that you'd have to contend with.
So one way that or quite a revolutionary step we took last year at the start of the administration, was to convert all allowances to cash and allow students the freedom and put some financial power in their hands to negotiate better deals for them. So what we find increasingly now is that the students use this financial muscle to negotiate better accommodation for them. They are no longer stuck in a room with 8 people. They can go stay outside and still pay, you know. So we see some movements in that respect where students are no longer monopolized by merchants and by
But Randall, you'd also admit that there's still a lot that needs to be done in that, because the public-private partnership, although the ideal is good, the reality is not necessarily that. We've seen landlords that are exploiting students. We've seen students who, no matter how hard they try, they still can't afford it.
But the group that I referred to are students that actually go out and secure private accommodation. So we find, especially in the townships and especially in the rural areas, they strike deals with family or you know, the auntie might put up another room, which is much better than many of the hostel rooms. So we see some entrepreneurial activity starting to take hold. And I'm talking beyond just the formal public-private partnerships. But the accommodation problem is important for us because it's important for our students to live in decent conditions.
So how are you dealing with that for next year? Because we started off this year with that promise that that won't be an issue. But unfortunately, we saw protests that spoke to the fact that it is still a major issue, that there's a shortage of beds and there's a huge gap between what students get and what they're able to afford in the end.
So, like I said, we have put more financial muscle in the hands of students to negotiate for themselves. I can't, unfortunately, talk about some of the new provisions that will be coming out in 2020, but we have taken all the lessons that we've learned and we've addressed some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And I think it's going to, I hope, it's going to be a much smoother start to 2020.
What about financial management? NSFAS was at some point under administration. That's when you also came in to help clean up some of the kinks in the system. We saw very worrying reports several weeks ago about some NSFAS employees who have been found wanting, especially with regards to alleged fraud and taking away much needed money from students. How have you been able to address those? So
we're still under administration. So I've got a second term of administration. And my key function for the second term is to appoint a new executive. We've just advertised for a CEO and we'll be appointing the other executives. We are making big progress cleaning the place up. So as we've stabilized our systems, our data is much more reliable, and our forensic investigations are starting to yield very positive results. So we have already effected a few arrests. I suspect more would come. We are vetting the entire staff of NSFAS, and we are, where we find people that have misdeclared, or we're taking action. So my hope is that by the time the new executive, when I hand over to the new executive, the place will be cleaned up and will be functional. Now, part of the main job for the administration second term is to reimagine the new NSFAS. So a lot of design will have to take place, consultation with stakeholders. Our systems are suboptimal. We have to put in new systems. But it's in a much better space than what it was 2 years ago. At least this year we paid every month to more than 600,000 students. There were hiccups and here and there, but by and large, 600,000 students received their money on time from February.
Right. So then let's look at the last several weeks of the applications. When is the closing date? What are you advising students to do?
So the closing date is on the 30th. We have now...
Of November.
Of 30th of November. We have now used the current statistics that we have to identify the, shall we call it the flat spots or the weak spots. And we are now going to send people into that. In fact, today we have deployed our first mobile truck into Limpopo to go to outlying villages and small towns to actually take it closer to people. But my advice remains, people must apply as early as possible. And it's fairly easy. Once you've supplied your identity number, we validate your existence and that of your parents directly with Home Affairs. Your SASA status we validate with the Department of Social Development. So it's fairly easy to apply and get everything done. But the main form that people must sign is their consent form for us to check their financial status. If they don't sign it, then we can't check it.
But what about people whose circumstances change suddenly? So you start with both parents in a good position to be able to enter university, no matter how difficult the circumstances, but then they spiral into something worse where you now need NSFAS aid.
So we do cater for that. There's an appeals process, and we've had many instances, where people lose their jobs once the child has already been at university, or the young person, and there are vehicle accommodation made for such cases. The main point is you must present us with the evidence. Don't just stay
what
away.
is the cut-off date for that? Because so we've got the 30th of November, but going into the early few weeks of next year of 2020, what would you say would definitely be a cut-off point where you can no longer appeal, you're part of that appeals process?
So we will finalize the applications now in the end of November. Then we will start processing it. And prior to registration, we will notify people of their eligibility status for NSFAS. Then upon receipt from the university of the registration, the student then become funded. Now, at that particular point, when we reject you as a student and you find that things have changed like you've just described, then there's an appeal period that we will open up. I'm not exactly sure what that period will be, but there's normal sufficient time for that. And in some cases, universities also contact us during the course of the year when people's circumstances change.
But you are confident that 2020 is going to go smoothly for you?
I think we should just keep our hands, we should not become too cocky on them.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll keep you to that, and you'll come and chat to us about that. Thank you very much. Dr. Randall Carolissen is NSFAS Administrator.